True story, my DIL tried to ban me from Thanksgiving, but I had the deed to the house. Have you ever poured your entire being into raising a child, only to watch them, as an adult, effortlessly cast you aside for someone new? Have you ever had your history, your very essence, deemed an inconvenience, an embarrassment, by the one person you thought would always cherish you? Have you ever felt the slow, agonizing erosion of your worth, piece by piece, until one day, you simply had nothing left to lose? I have. Oh, how I have. But they didn't know I would be the one to write the final chapter of their story. The text message arrived on my phone, cold and clinical, like a surgeon's blade slicing through the last vestiges of my hope. It was from Xenia, my daughter-in-law, or rather, the woman who had slowly, meticulously, eroded every ounce of warmth from my son, Julian. Her name flashed on the screen, a familiar dread coiling in my stomach. The glow of the screen seemed to mock the dim light filtering into my quiet kitchen, a stark contrast to the vibrant life it once held. It was about Thanksgiving, a day that, for generations in our family, had been about warmth, about gathering, about the comforting embrace of tradition. My heart, already a fragile thing after years of her subtle cruelties, dropped with a dull thud that resonated through my entire chest, vibrating up into my throat, threatening to choke me. Alara, it began, no mom or grandma, just a stark addressing of my name, as if I were a stranger she barely tolerated, a minor character in the grand production of her life. The impersonal greeting felt like a deliberate blow, designed to diminish me before the real message even began. Regarding Thanksgiving dinner, we've decided to go with a very modern, minimalist aesthetic this year. High-profile guests, you understand. Your traditional presence, while appreciated in its own way, would unfortunately clash with the sophisticated, sponsored vibe we're cultivating. It wouldn't do to have anything feel out of place, or to embarrass anyone, especially with the brand representatives attending. So, we think it's best if you sit this one out. Perhaps we can do a quick lunch another time. I read it once, then twice, my vision blurring at the edges, the words swimming before my eyes like malevolent insects. My traditional presence. She meant my comfortable old sweaters, the ones I'd worn while baking Christmas cookies with Julian as a boy. She meant my stories of how my mother and I used to roast the turkey in the old oven, filling the house with laughter and the rich scent of sage. She meant the worn photographs I sometimes brought out, faded images of happier Thanksgivings, of Julian as a toddler, his face smeared with cranberry sauce, or as a gangly teenager, awkwardly helping his father carve the turkey. She meant me. I was the clash. I was the embarrassment. It wasn't just an invitation rescinded, it was an eviction notice from my own family, delivered with the thinly veiled contempt of a socialite dismissing an unfashionable accessory, something old and worn that no longer fit the current season. The chill of the screen seeped into my fingertips, then my bones, turning me to ice. My hand trembled as I typed back, the letters blurring on the small keyboard. Julian, did you see this? Is this truly what you want? My breath hitched in my throat, each beat of my heart a desperate plea for the man I knew, the kind boy I had raised, to emerge from the shadow of this woman. I waited, my gaze fixed on the screen, willing his name to appear, praying for some sign that the son I knew still existed. The reply was almost immediate, but it wasn't from Julian. It was from Xenia again. Julian agrees, Alara. We're on the same page. It's for the best. My son. My only son. The boy who, as a child, would burst into tears if I so much as had a cold. He couldn't even send a text himself. He allowed his wife to speak for him, to deliver this crushing blow. He allowed her to dismiss his own mother, his own history. I called him, my fingers fumbling with the screen, the numbers blurring through the prickle of unshed tears. He answered, his voice a tight, barely audible murmur, as if he were speaking from a great distance, or perhaps, from behind a thick, soundproof wall. Julian, I choked out, the name catching in my throat, ragged and desperate. Did you really agree to this? To me not being at Thanksgiving? Your own mother? There was a long silence, pregnant with all the words he wouldn't say, all the courage he no longer possessed. I could almost hear Xenia's sharp whisper in the background, a low, insistent hum, though I couldn't make out the words themselves. It was the sound of her control, her dominance, a subtle but constant pressure that had long since molded him to her will. Finally, Julian cleared his throat, a small, pathetic sound. "Mom," he mumbled, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, it's just Thanksgiving. Xenia has a lot riding on this. Sponsors, you know? It's important for her career. And, well, you know how she is about things needing to be perfect. We can see you another day. Really? Another day. As if Thanksgiving was just any other Tuesday. As if my presence, my history, my very being, could be rescheduled like a dental appointment, a minor inconvenience to be slotted in when the important things were done. His voice lacked conviction, lacked warmth, lacked the love I had poured into him for decades, the love that had sustained me through years of widowhood. His silence, his ultimate acquiescence, was a betrayal far more profound than any shouted argument, any angry outburst. It was a complete surrender of his will, a final abandonment of his mother for the sake of his wife's superficial ambitions. The humiliation was not just public, it was intensely personal, burrowing deep into my soul, a cold, sharp shard of glass. That was it. That was the final straw. The well of my patience, which I once believed was bottomless, that reservoir I had painstakingly filled with understanding, forgiveness, and endless hope, had finally, irrevocably, run dry. And you think this was the first time? Oh, if only. If only that text message had been an isolated incident, a rare moment of thoughtlessness. But no, dear friend, this was merely the crescendo in a symphony of slights, a lifetime of quiet erosions that had been chipping away at my dignity for years, dulling my spirit like a stone endlessly smoothed by water. When Julian first brought Xenia home, she was a vision. All sparkling eyes, a cascade of perfectly styled blonde hair, and a smile that seemed to radiate pure light. Her voice was like liquid honey, and her compliments flowed effortlessly, an almost theatrical charm that swept me off my feet. "Oh, Mrs. Davies," she'd coo, her eyes wide with what seemed like genuine admiration, "your home is simply divine. So much character, so much history. I just adore these antique pieces." She'd praise my cooking, lingering over my lemon meringue pie, admire my garden, her delicate fingers tracing the petals of my prize-winning roses, and even ask for my recipes, scribbling notes on a tiny, elegant notepad. I was charmed, of course. Deeply, utterly charmed. Any mother wants to see her son happy, and Xenia seemed to radiate happiness, drawing Julian into her orbit with an intensity one hadn't seen before, making him laugh in a way I hadn't heard since his father passed. I thought, finally, he's found his match, someone who appreciates the warmth of family, who understands the value of home. How naive I was. How terribly, tragically naive. The cracks started subtly, barely perceptible at first, like faint lines appearing on an old painting, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. After they married, the compliments began to shift, ever so slightly, like a tide subtly changing direction. "Your home is charming, yes," Xenia would say, her voice still sweet but with a new, almost imperceptible edge, "but think how much more modern it could be with a few updates, Mrs. Davies. A fresh coat of white paint would open everything up, don't you think? And darling, Julian," she'd turn to him, her hand on his arm, "your mother's kitchen is simply adorable, but it's not really set up for proper entertaining, is it? So many dark wood cabinets. Or, your cooking is lovely, Mom, truly, but perhaps a little heavy for today's palates, don't you think? Xenia's caterer uses so many light, fresh ingredients." My character and history slowly, insidiously, transformed into clutter and dated. My home, the sanctuary Thomas and I had built, began to feel like a museum piece, and relic to be tolerated, not cherished. Then came the help. Xenia was always so busy, so important with her nascent online career as an influencer. Her days were filled with content creation, brand meetings, and networking events. "Mom," Julian would say, often with a hint of fatigue in his voice, "could you just whip up a batch of your famous shortbread for Xenia's charity bake sale? She's swamped with meetings, and it's for a good cause." Of course, I would. My fingers, arthritic with age, would ache from kneading the dough, but my heart would swell with the thought of helping my son's wife. "Mom, the garden needs weeding, and Julian's back is bothering him from all those long hours at work. Could you pop over? Just for an hour or two?" I'd be there, my knees aching in the damp soil, my back protesting with every bend, but my heart full, believing I was contributing, being useful to my family, cementing my place. But it was never reciprocal. If I needed a ride to a doctor's appointment, Xenia was too busy with a shoot, or had a call with a major brand. Julian would offer a perfunctory promise that never materialized, his eyes avoiding mine, a faint flush on his cheeks. "Mom, I'm so sorry, Xenia just sprung this on me." He'd trail off, and I'd nod, understanding, swallowing the disappointment. One Christmas, Xenia decided our traditional family dinner, always held at my house, was too small scale for their growing influence. "Darling, Julian," she'd declared, not to me, but within my earshot, her voice carrying across the living room where I sat knitting by the fire, "we simply must host this year. It's crucial for my brand image to show off our entertaining capabilities. Plus, your mother's kitchen is simply too quaint for the kind of catering we'll need for our guests. We need space, professional equipment, something that truly reflects our aspirational lifestyle." I was relegated to bringing a side dish, carefully chosen by Xenia to fit the theme, a minimalist, deconstructed cranberry relish, a far cry from my usual robust, comforting offering. I sat there, a guest in my own family's most cherished holiday, watching Xenia bask in the compliments of strangers, her face glowing under the soft glow of rented uplights, while Julian nodded along, a vacant, almost glazed smile plastered on his face. He even introduced me as Julian's mother, not my mother, to a few of their more important guests, as if I were a distant relative, a mere footnote. It felt like a demotion, a stripping away of my identity, as if my very existence was defined only by my relation to him, and even that was tenuous. The financial manipulations followed, a subtle tightening of the screws. Not direct demands, but artful suggestions, always framed as a family need, a shared burden. "Mom, this old house really needs a new roof, it's leaking pretty badly in the attic. Julian and I are saving for a down payment on a new car, something more suitable for Xenia's brand appearances, so we can't swing it right now. Could you possibly? Or, the property taxes are getting so high, Mom, with all the new developments. Julian and I have invested heavily in Xenia's new venture, a truly revolutionary app, so we're a bit tight. Any chance you could help out this quarter? Just until her next funding round." I dipped into my modest savings, the careful provisions my late husband Thomas had left me, always for Julian, always for the family. They never offered to pay me back. It was assumed. It was expected. My savings, intended for my comfortable retirement, dwindled, replaced by a growing sense of unease, a gnawing suspicion that I was being systematically drained, not nurtured. Julian. My Julian. The boy who used to cling to my hand, his small fingers wrapped tightly around mine, who would race to me with scraped knees and tear-filled eyes, knowing I held the magic balm of comfort. The boy who would tell me all his secrets, whispered in the dark, confiding his deepest fears and wildest dreams. The transformation was agonizing to watch, like witnessing a vibrant plant slowly wither and fade. At first, he'd try to mediate, to gently remind Xenia of my feelings. "Xenia, maybe Mom would prefer to use her own casserole dish." He'd start, only to be cut off by her sharp gaze, a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand, or a saccharine sweet, "Darling, Alara knows what's best for the overall aesthetic, don't you, dear?" Then, he'd retreat into silence, his shoulders slumping, a look of quiet shame in his eyes, a flicker of the boy I knew buried beneath layers of acquiescence. He'd apologize to me later, in hushed tones, often when Xenia was out of earshot. She just gets so stressed, Mom. You know how she is about things being perfect. It's for her career, you understand. But the apologies grew weaker, less frequent, a mere whisper of what they once were, until they ceased altogether. He became her echo, her silent enabler. He saw me being hurt, being diminished, and he chose comfort over integrity, his wife's approval over his mother's well-being. He became a puppet, yes, but a willing one, his strings pulled by Xenia's whims and ambitions, his own voice a lost echo in the vast emptiness where his conviction once stood. My heart ached for the son I had lost, even as the shell of him stood before me, a stranger. I learned to keep my thoughts to myself, to bite my tongue until it bled, to swallow the indignity, all for the sake of keeping some semblance of peace, some fragile, tenuous connection to my boy. Oh, if only I had known then what I know now. But they didn't know about the final secret my late husband, Thomas, left me. They thought they knew everything. They thought they had me perfectly categorized, the sweet, traditional, slightly too old mother, easily dismissed, easily manipulated, a relic of a bygone era. What they didn't realize was that Thomas, bless his wise, foresightful soul, had always understood the delicate dance of family, and he had understood the potential for a certain type of person to exploit kindness, to prey on generosity. He had always been a man of quiet strength, observing more than he spoke, and his observations were always keen, always accurate. This house, this beautiful, sprawling old home, with its creaking floors that whispered stories of generations past, its sun-drenched windows that invited the warmth of the outside in, the very house where I had raised Julian, where Thomas and I had built our life, our sanctuary, was my anchor in a world that often felt adrift. Xenia and Julian always assumed it would be theirs, eventually. They spoke of when we inherit the house with casual entitlement, a possessive gleam in Xenia's eyes, even making plans for renovations that would strip away its very soul, turning it into one of Xenia's sterile, modern aesthetic showpieces. They believed it was already a given, that Thomas had left it directly to Julian, or jointly to us, with Julian as the primary heir. After all, what else would a man do for his only son? It was a common assumption, one I never corrected, for fear of unsettling the precarious peace I clung to. But Thomas, he was a meticulous man, a man who saw the chessboard 10 moves ahead. A man who loved me fiercely and sought to protect me, even from beyond the grave. Days after he passed, when the fog of my grief was still thick and suffocating, his lawyer, a stoic, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, handed me a sealed envelope. Her voice was gentle, filled with a quiet compassion that belied her severe demeanor. "Mrs. Davies," she'd said, her eyes kind, "Mr. Davies left specific instructions for this to be given to you, and you alone, at your discretion, when you feel the time is right, or if circumstances necessitate it." Inside, nestled among other important documents like insurance policies and investment details, was the original, unblemished deed to the house. I remember my hands trembling as I pulled it out, my brow furrowing in confusion. It wasn't in Julian's name, or even Julian's and mine. It was solely, unequivocally, in my name. Thomas had, years ago, quietly transferred full ownership to me, citing love and protection as the explicit reason in a brief, poignant note tucked inside the deed itself. He had created a separate trust for Julian, a substantial one, enough to provide for him comfortably, but the house, the physical embodiment of our life together, was mine. Mine to live in, mine to manage, mine to decide its fate. He had done it specifically so that I would always have a roof over my head, untouchable, unassailable, and that I would never be at the mercy of anyone, not even my own son, should circumstances turn sour. He had seen a flicker of something in Xenia, even then, a calculating ambition beneath the charming facade, something I, blinded by a mother's hope and the joy of seeing my son seemingly happy, had tragically missed. I had kept this secret for years, tucked away in a safe deposit box, a silent, powerful guardian. It was my shield, my last line of defense. I had hoped I would never need to use it. I had hoped that Julian, despite Xenia's insidious influence, would always remember who I was to him, what I had given him, the unconditional love that had shaped his very being. I had tolerated, I had endured, I had swallowed my pride countless times, all for the phantom of family peace and the faint, persistent hope that my son would one day wake up, that the fog would lift and he would see clearly again. I wanted to believe that the Julian I knew, the one who loved me, was still in there somewhere, just buried. But that Thanksgiving text, that dismissive, humiliating decree, delivered with such cold indifference. That final, gut-wrenching betrayal by my own son's silence, by his casual, almost flippant dismissal of my pain. It was the moment the veil lifted completely, irrevocably. It wasn't just about Thanksgiving dinner anymore. It was about my worth, my dignity, my very existence being erased by the people who were supposed to cherish me, who were supposed to be my family. The memory of Thomas's loving foresight flooded me, his quiet strength enveloping me even from the grave. He had given me this shield, this sword, for precisely this moment. He had trusted me to wield it when the time was right. I sat there, the text message still glowing on my phone screen, and a profound, icy calm settled over me. The tears that had threatened to fall earlier never came. They had been replaced by a different kind of moisture, a clear, sharp resolve that solidified in my core, chilling me to the bone, yet making me feel stronger than I had in years. No more. No more quiet endurance. No more being an afterthought, a faded photograph in a sterile room. Julian had chosen his side, and Xenia had shown her true colors, not just to me, but to the world, to anyone who cared to look beneath the shimmering surface. And now, I would show them mine. The house, this home they so casually assumed was theirs for the taking, would be the stage. The deed, my secret trump card, would be the final, undeniable word. I would remind everyone who truly owned the property, and more importantly, who deserved the respect within it. The decision was made. The game, as they had unwittingly started it, was about to end. And I, Alara Davies, would be the one to deal the final hand. And then, the day came. Thanksgiving Day. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves and distant wood smoke, mingling incongruously with the distinct aroma of roasting turkey and expensive catering, wafting from my former home. I dressed carefully, not in my usual comfortable clothes, the soft wool sweaters and worn jeans, but in a smart, dignified outfit, a tailored navy blue suit, its lines sharp and unyielding, that bespoke quiet strength, a subtle armor. I wore the pearls Thomas had given me on our 25th anniversary, their luminous sheen a symbol of enduring love and resilience, a silent testament to a bond they could never understand. My handbag felt unusually heavy, weighted not just by the usual contents, but by the legal document that was about to shatter a carefully constructed illusion. I arrived precisely at 2 p.m., just as the first wave of Xenia's high-profile guests were pulling up in their sleek, expensive cars, luxury sedans, gleaming SUVs, their occupants emerging with an air of practiced nonchalance. The house, my home, was utterly unrecognizable. The old wooden door, which Thomas had painstakingly stripped and varnished years ago, revealing the rich, warm grain beneath, was now painted a stark, fashionable matte black, devoid of warmth or welcome. The warm, inviting porch lights had been replaced by harsh, modern spotlights, casting unforgiving shadows. Inside, through the large bay window, I could see the dining room, stripped of its familiar furniture, the antique mahogany table where generations had gathered, the comfortable upholstered chairs. It now gleamed with minimalist white and chrome, stark, cold, and utterly alien. Xenia, in a shimmering, architectural dress that seemed more sculpture than garment, flitted about like a hummingbird, directing caterers and photographers with sharp gestures and whispered commands. Julian, looking uncomfortable and lost in a stiff, ill-fitting suit, hovered in her wake, offering weak, strained smiles to arriving guests, a pathetic shadow of the vibrant man he once was. I walked up the pathway, each step deliberate, resonating with years of unspoken grievances, of swallowed insults, of quiet heartbreak. The gravel crunched under my sensible shoes, a defiant sound in the carefully manicured silence. As I reached the front door, it swung open. It was Julian. His eyes widened, a flicker of raw panic and deep shame passing through them as he saw me standing there, resolute and uninvited. "Mom," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper, a question filled with dread. "What are you doing here?" I thought. Before he could usher me away, before he could concoct another weak excuse, Xenia appeared beside him, her smile freezing on her face like a mask of ice as she saw me. Her eyes, usually so calculating and bright, narrowed, turning cold and hard as steel, chips of frost. "Alara," she hissed, her voice low, laced with fury, vibrating with barely contained rage. "What is the meaning of this? I told you not to come. This is highly unprofessional. You'll ruin everything." Her carefully curated facade was cracking, revealing the harsh, demanding, utterly contemptuous woman beneath. The air around her bristled with unspoken threats. Guests, drawn by the sudden tension, by the sharp tone in Xenia's voice, began to turn, their polite conversations dying down into a stunned silence. Cell phone cameras, ever present in Xenia's high-profile circles, flashed, capturing not the staged perfection Xenia desired, but the raw, unexpected drama unfolding on the doorstep, a scene utterly unscripted and therefore infinitely more compelling. I met Xenia's furious glare, my own gaze steady, unblinking. My voice, calm, steady, and amplified by years of suppressed emotion, years of biting my tongue, carried clearly through the momentarily silent entryway, cutting through the stunned quiet like a sharp blade. "I am here, Xenia," I said, my voice resonating with a newfound strength, "because this is my home. And I have a very important announcement to make to all of you, especially to my son, Julian, and to you, Xenia." Julian stepped forward, his face pale, his eyes darting between me and his furious wife, like a trapped animal. "Mom, please," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation, a faint echo of the little boy who used to beg for an extra story at bedtime. "Let's talk about this later. Not now. This isn't the place." "No, Julian," I said, my gaze fixed on his, piercing through his carefully constructed avoidance. "The time for talking later is long past. The time for truth is now. You, of all people, need to hear this, right here, right now." With a slow, deliberate movement, I reached into my handbag, the weight of the deed a familiar comfort in my hand. I withdrew the folded, legal-sized document, its crisp edges a stark contrast to the soft leather of my purse. The sharp rustle of the paper seemed deafening in the suddenly hushed room, drawing every eye to my hands. I unfolded it carefully, almost reverently, holding it up for all to see, its official seals and signatures undeniably prominent. "This," I announced, my voice clear and unwavering, resonating with a quiet authority that had been buried for too long, "is the original deed to this property. This house, which you, Xenia, have so meticulously transformed into a modern aesthetic showcase, stripping away its soul and its history, and which you, Julian, have so readily believed was your birthright, your guaranteed inheritance, is, and has always been, solely and unequivocally, mine." A collective gasp rippled through the stunned guests, followed by a murmur of disbelief. Xenia's jaw dropped, her perfectly made-up face contorting in a mask of disbelief and dawning horror, her carefully constructed composure shattering before my very eyes. Julian stared at the document, then at me, then back at the deed, his eyes wide and vacant, as if willing it to be a fake, a cruel trick. His shame was palpable, a suffocating aura around him, a visible weight on his slumped shoulders. "My late husband, Thomas Davies," I continued, my voice gaining strength, addressing the bewildered guests and the now paralyzed Julian and Xenia, in his infinite wisdom and love, ensured that I would always have a home, always have security, and always retain my dignity. He legally transferred full ownership to me many years ago, a fact that was deliberately kept private to avoid complications. Complications, it seems, that have now come to pass precisely as he, in his foresight, might have predicted. I looked directly at Xenia, my eyes holding hers, allowing her to see the full force of my long-suppressed anger. You claimed my traditional presence would clash. You dismissed me, humiliated me, and thought you could simply erase me from this home, from my son's life, from our family's most sacred traditions. You used this house as a prop for your online image, a backdrop for your carefully curated life, without an ounce of respect for its history, or for its true owner, for me. My voice grew stronger, imbued with the righteous anger of years of quiet suffering, a force that had been building, silently, relentlessly. And you, Julian, I turned to my son, the pain in my voice a raw, exposed nerve, stood by silently. You allowed her to do it. You watched me be diminished, insulted, erased, and you did nothing. Your silence was a betrayal that cut deeper than any insult, a wound that may never truly heal. So, here is my announcement, I declared, my voice resonating with a profound, unshakable finality, echoing slightly in the suddenly cavernous entryway. As the sole legal owner of this property, I am serving you, Xenia Davies, and Julian Davies, with a formal eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate these premises. This house is no longer a stage for your sponsorships or a backdrop for your curated life. It is my home. And it is no longer yours. The silence that followed was absolute, shattered only by the distant murmur of traffic outside, a faint, indifferent hum of the world continuing on. Xenia's face was a grotesque tableau of shock, fury, and utter defeat, her perfectly sculpted features twisted into an unrecognizable mask. Her high-profile guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, some openly staring at the dramatic scene, their phones still poised, ready to capture the fallout, others quickly looking away, desperate to avoid eye contact, shrinking back into the elegant drapery. Julian, my son, simply stood there, his face ashen, his shoulders slumped, the full weight of his betrayal and the devastating consequences crashing down upon him. The regret in his eyes was stark, raw, and undeniable, a chilling clarity that seemed to scream, "What have I done?" It was the look of a man who had finally woken up, only to find himself in a nightmare of his own making, his carefully constructed world crumbling before his very eyes. The respect she had demanded, but never truly earned, evaporated into thin air, leaving behind only the cold, hard truth. So, where is my daughter-in-law who called me the maid now, you ask? Oh, Xenia. Her fall was as swift and dramatic as her meteoric rise. The video of that Thanksgiving day, captured by at least one of her own high-profile, social media-savvy guests, hungry for content, went viral within hours. Not the carefully edited promotional video she had planned, filled with staged perfection and saccharine smiles, but the raw, unscripted footage of me, standing on her doorstep, deed in hand, reclaiming my property and my dignity. The internet, as it often does, devoured the drama, tearing through her carefully crafted facade like a ravenous beast. Her sponsors, quick to distance themselves from the scandal and the negative publicity, dropped her like a hot potato, their carefully worded press releases appearing almost instantly. Her modern aesthetic was exposed as a shallow veneer, her high-profile connections revealed to be fair-weather friends who vanished at the first sign of trouble, leaving her isolated and exposed. She tried to spin it, of course, attempting to portray me as an unhinged elderly woman, a family black sheep, but the raw evidence, and the sheer audacity of her actions leading up to it, spoke for itself. Within weeks, her online empire, built on borrowed grandeur and a carefully constructed illusion, collapsed into a pile of shattered dreams and unfulfilled contracts. She was left with nothing but the echo of her own ambition. Julian, oh, Julian. He was devastated. He saw his wife's carefully constructed world, and by extension, his own comfortable life, shatter into a million pieces. The shame he felt that day on the doorstep lingered, a persistent shadow that followed him, clouding his every thought. He tried to apologize, to reach out, to explain, to somehow undo the damage. He came to my new, smaller apartment, which I had rented as a temporary measure, begging for forgiveness, his face haggard, his eyes hollow. He admitted, finally, that he had been a coward, that he had allowed Xenia to manipulate him, to drive a wedge between us, to turn him into someone he barely recognized. He said he saw now how she had used him, how she had used everyone, for her own gain, for her own endless need for validation. He tried to rebuild, to mend the gaping chasm between us. But trust, once broken so profoundly, is not easily mended. I told him I needed time, space. That some wounds ran too deep to heal quickly, that the betrayal had cut through to my very soul. Xenia, furious at her downfall and blaming him for not handling me, for not protecting her image, eventually left him. Their marriage, built on ambition and convenience rather than genuine love or respect, couldn't withstand the harsh light of truth. He lost his wife, his home, and for a long time, the full respect of his mother. He had to start over, from scratch, burdened by the consequences of his silence, by the choices he had made. He learned the hard way that a man's true worth is not measured by the luxury of his home or the prestige of his wife, but by his courage, his integrity, and his unwavering loyalty to those who truly love him. It was a painful, bitter lesson, but one he desperately needed to learn. As for me, I moved back into my beautiful old home. The first thing I did was take down all of Xenia's sterile decor, every chrome fixture, every stark white canvas. I banished the cold, impersonal aesthetic. I brought back my comfortable furniture, my cherished photographs, the warmth and the history that had been stripped away. I repainted the door its original welcoming shade of soft blue, hung my favorite wreath, and filled the house once more with the scent of freshly baked bread and blooming roses from my garden. I reclaimed my peace, my dignity, and my sanctuary. The house breathes again, filled not with the cold calculation of modern aesthetics, but with the quiet comfort of home, of memories, of love. I spend my days in my garden, watching the seasons change, reading my favorite books, knitting intricate patterns, and sometimes, just sitting in my favorite armchair, watching the sunlight stream through the windows, bathing the familiar rooms in a golden glow. The silence is no longer heavy with unspoken resentment or suppressed pain, it is light, peaceful, and entirely my own. I learned that sometimes, the only way to protect yourself is to stand up, to speak your truth, and to wield the power you possess, even if it means shattering illusions, even if it means breaking ties that no longer serve you. Never, ever, test anyone's patience to its limits, because you never know what quiet strength lies beneath the surface, waiting for the final straw to snap. Are there any other mothers out there who have forgotten themselves for the sake of their children's happiness, only to find themselves cast aside? Or perhaps you've seen a loved one become a puppet in someone else's hands, losing themselves in the process? My channel is filled with stories just like this, stories of resilience, of reclaiming one's power, and of the profound lessons life teaches us when we least expect them. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to my channel and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next chapter. Share your own troubles, your insights, your thoughts, and your wisdom in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences truly help others feel less alone. Thank you for listening.